Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. First of all, Happy New Year to all our listeners, and in style we are starting this new year with another new podcast because traditionally on the 1st of January the X2O Trofee heads to Baal for the GP Sven Nys. They did so again this year and we are going to talk about that with Jens Dekker.
Hi.
And Twan.
Hello.
First, we're going to talk about the men's race, and it was Iserbyt who had the fastest start there. He was first into the field, but Tom Pidcock quickly took over. He started with a lot of motivation and was eager to show himself. He created a gap, and that led to 4 leaders. It was Pidcock who led with Van Aert, Iserbyt and Aerts in his wheel. Toon Aerts then was trying to take over the lead and showing himself at the bonification sprint, grabbing 5 extra seconds for the classification. He kept putting the pressure on the other riders until he made a mistake and then disappeared from the front of our screens. He would suffer for the rest of the race a bit in the background, having a couple of punctures and crashes, but in the front it was still pretty interesting. Iserbyt, Pidcock and Van Aert were close together throughout the first half of the race. Iserbyt was leading and was trying to put pressure on Van Aert and Pidcock, but that didn't really work. With 4 laps to go, it was Van Aert who really accelerated and opened the gap over Pidcock and Iserbyt. Van Aert opened 15 seconds almost until he made a mistake. He crashed. Following that crash, he needed to change his shoe, and that meant that Pidcock was in the lead. Van Aert needed to come back from 20 seconds down with 2.5 laps to go. Van Aert started pacing and was closing the gap towards Pidcock and rejoined the lead with Pidcock just before we went into the last lap. Pidcock and Van Aert went into the last lap and were going head to head there. Pidcock was trying to keep in the front because he knew that he needed to put Van Aert under pressure on the technical sections, and he did. We went into the dirt jump downhill and Pidcock fully sent it there, not crashing, but Van Aert managed to counter that on the following climb by putting down more power. If we go a bit further through that final lap, we saw that Van Aert then made a decisive attack, but it didn't go well at once. He unclipped twice, and that meant that Pidcock could stay in it for a bit longer, but on the uphill, eventually in the running, Van Aert was just a bit faster in the running than Pidcock. Pidcock 3-4 seconds down and still in it for the win with just a half lap to go, but then ultimately he made a mistake. In a muddy section he got catapulted into the side and needed to unclip, and that was the race over. Van Aert claiming another victory, keeping his 100% win streak ahead of Tom Pidcock and Iserbyt, putting in a strong ride to end third. Let's talk a bit about that great battle for the win then. In my opinion it was a pretty entertaining race, one of the best this season. For me, Besançon still tops this, but I really enjoyed it. Let's go towards the beginning of the race first. Van Aert didn't attack early, just like we saw in Loenhout. Was it similar as in Loenhout, where he was just playing, or was there more to it today? Or did we see a weaker Van Aert today?
I don't think he was weaker per se. I think he was just waiting, not spending too much energy, not doing the full race solo. I think that was his plan. We've seen it a couple times that he waits until the 30 or 40 minute mark to attack, and that seemed to happen again today. So I don't think there's really anything wrong with Wout. I think he's just trying to conserve a little bit of energy in the starts of these races.
I would think so as well. I do think that Van Aert was still waiting around a bit because you saw as soon as he put in that one big acceleration, that was when he immediately opened a pretty big gap already over Pidcock. Then he made that mistake in the downhill where he crashed. What went wrong there for him?
I think he just slid. It just happens in the mud sometimes. Couldn't really do it. He was probably going a little bit faster into that turn than the previous laps because he was attacking. And then sometimes it happens that you just slide.
A bit too much speed through that corner then. That's also what I figured happened there. Nothing too serious, but then he broke his shoe, so needed to go to the pit, and then Pidcock came into the lead. Tom, I think Pidcock was really eager to show himself today, not scared to take initiative, really putting the pressure on already earlier in the race, but especially after that shoe change. Some might think, well, it was already dropped by Van Aert, let's take it a bit easy, but Pidcock completely the opposite. He thought, well, this is an opportunity handed to me, let's fully go for it today.
Yeah, he came ready to race today, and he got an opportunity handed to him, quite a few seconds, and he fully went for it. Unfortunately, it still wasn't quite enough, but he put up a very good fight.
I think that we see that the form of Pidcock is going in an upwards trend the last couple of weeks. I mean, he probably had a bit of freshness here as well, but with the exception of Dendermonde, we've seen a solid Pidcock. I mean, also in Heus de Zolder, where he ended second on a parcours that doesn't suit him. I think that Pidcock, as said, he said it himself that he's peaking purely towards the World Championships. I think his form is going upwards, but I think we also have to conclude that he simply does not have the power level to match Van Aert as of now, because after that shoe change, Van Aert closed 20 seconds within 1.5 laps. Despite Pidcock being good on the technical sections, Van Aert this strong, then again it raises the question, even bad luck today doesn't really seem to be able to stop him. Do we think that Pidcock could have done anything different today to win?
I don't really think so. I didn't see any mistakes or any big mistakes anyway. Probably just Van Aert was stronger, and Van Aert would have had to have more bad luck to get a win for Pidcock.
Van Aert in the last lap also put in the fastest lap of the race, which was 10 seconds faster than the final lap Pidcock put in, despite Van Aert even sitting up a bit at the final part of the lap. In my opinion, that is just telling for the race that Van Aert did, just waiting around, saving a bit of energy as we just concluded in the beginning of the race, and then keeping something behind his hand for the final part of the race. And today it was necessary because he made that mistake and broke his shoe. Not the first rider this season to fall victim of a broken shoe and needing to change his shoe, but then again, just a strong performance here, and I think that both Van Aert and Pidcock should leave Baal with happy feelings and be satisfied. And then again, it just leaves us to speculate if Van Aert will do the World Championships or not, but we already did that in the previous podcast, so let's not keep being stuck on that, but let's focus on Iserbyt ending third today. I think that this was one of the best races this season of Iserbyt.
Yeah, I think riding a very solid race. Clearly the two people ahead of him were better than him today, but he limited the damages very well, and he took a bunch of time out of Twan Aerts in the classification, where you would expect Twan Aerts maybe to be better on this course. So I have all round good feeling for everyone on the podium.
Yeah, the one thing you have to keep in mind is there were a couple of riders missing. Don't want to talk about them too much, of course, because they weren't there. But someone like Quinten Hermans might have been close as well. And Twan Aerts didn't have a great race, let's say that. So it maybe it would have painted a bit of a different picture if he had been up there without the problems he had. But definitely a strong race. He was close to Pidcock, close to Van Aert. So a strong race for Ailey.
Yeah, I do agree that this could have been something for Quinten Hermans, but then again, he wasn't here, and as said, Iserbyt was doing good to keep up. However, yes, I agree with Twan that you would normally expect Twan Aerts to be good here, better than Iserbyt, but then I also want to state that Twan Aerts didn't lose that much time in my opinion. He lost in the end 38 seconds in the classification, which is still a lot, but we need to consider that Twan Aerts had a puncture and needed to ride a long time with that puncture. He also had 2 crashes in the background. So I think overall, if we consider all of that Twan Aerts still managed to put in decent lap times. Because if you look at the lap times compared with Iserbyt, in the clean laps for Twan Aerts, he was matching Iserbyt. So yes, Iserbyt does a good job for the classification, but he was already more than 2 minutes down going into this race after he sat up in Loenhout. But I personally think that we did see a decent Twan Aerts today. I don't know how you guys think about that.
Yeah, if you look at the lap times, it's not even that bad. He has pretty consistent lap times actually, Twan Aerts. So maybe he had something every lap because he had quite a few problems. But I think he did a good job of limiting the losses. Have to do that sometimes in a classification on time. You always have some kind of bad race, and if this was his bad race, then he's got a good shot of taking back some time the next couple of races, I think.
I still think that after this ride, Twan Aerts is still in a very good position to win the X2O Trofee. But then again, like, we're only halfway there. Herentals is a very tough race, and then we have Hamme coming up later, which is a race that's usually, or at least that race weekend is usually a bit in function of the World Championships, so you can see strange results there. And then after the World Championships, we go to Lille and Brussels. Brussels also a cross that can often create big gaps. Iserbyt now 1 minute 20 down. It's still a lot, definitely not impossible. But do you guys think that Iserbyt is still going to pull back in the overall, or is Twan Aerts secured enough of a margin to solidify his leading position in the X2O Trophy?
I think at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to who is in form still after World Championships as well. Because, I mean, last year we saw Iserbyt really struggling, and if that's the same case this year, then there's no shot he is taking it. And also, he has to limit the damages once again, I think, in Herentals. And I think there is a lot more to say about the classification after that race.
Yeah, Herentals is probably the only race where we can expect really big differences, unless it's very muddy in Hammer or Brussels. Because the last 3 races are quite flat, technical, not very... probably not very tough. So that's probably the crucial race. If something goes wrong there, or someone has a really good or a really bad day, that could all change. But then after that, if the difference is similar, then I think Aerts is a very good shot of taking the overall. But it's still quite a few races to go, and halfway, I think. Is that correct? Yeah, 4 races done, 4 races to go. So it could still change, but Aerts is looking good, but it could go either way still, I think.
Let's run down our entire top 10 then. Wout van Aert claiming another win this season ahead of Tom Pidcock and Elie Iserbyt. 4th place went to Twan Aerts ahead of Michael van Toornaert, who actually looked pretty lively at some point throughout the race but then exploded. 6th place went to Ben Turner ahead of European champion Lars van der Haar. 8th place went to Jens Adams from the Hollebeek Hoeve team ahead of Laurens Sweeck, and Tommy also rounds out the top 10. Standout performance here, in my opinion, today is the performance of Ben Turner, racing his first race for the Ineos Grenadiers team today. 6th place. Really, really good ride by the young Brit, in my opinion.
Yeah, this might just be one of the best ever performances he has had in cyclocross. An amazing day for him, and really putting himself up there with some of the big names. Of course, Van der Haar probably not really finding a parcours to his liking, but you still have to take advantage of it. And in 6th place, it's quite amazing.
A really big surprise, I think, for Turner to get a very solid top 10 here. Wouldn't have expected that, I think, before the race. So yeah, strong ride, surprising. I look forward to seeing where he goes in the next month, because Worlds is coming up. Ineos is, has a good coaching team behind it, so we'll see where he goes.
Yeah, definitely interesting, and it's just his 2nd top 10 in a Belgian UCI race, if I am correct. Because last year he ended in the top 10 of the ATS Cross in Essen, and for the rest he's only ridden a bunch of under 23 races in Belgium where he ended in the top 10. So it's definitely a big step forward for the big Brit. I do think that this is the type of parcours that really suits him. Running, power, and that type of things is something that Ben Turner likes. But then again, you need to do it, and yes, there's also a couple of names not here. But then again, it's about the riders who are here. Turner is here, and we have to do it with that. So 6th place, a very good result for Turner, as I said earlier. I also think that if we look a bit further down, Jens Adams from the Hollebeek Hoeve team, the privateer, 8th place, also good. I would not have expected him to beat Sweeck, especially after the form that Jens Adams has in the last couple of weeks, where he's even being skipped for the selections in the World Cup.
Looking at the results at the end, it makes sense, but it's still very good to see him up there. Hasn't been having the greatest weeks, as you said, and still a good performance.
Yeah, I think this is sort of where you would expect Jens Adams, maybe not based on the final few weeks, but during the rest of the season he's been in the top 10 quite a lot. So really you'd expect him to be there when there's a couple of guys missing. It's just the final 2-3 weeks he's been a bit off the pace, but yeah, I don't know. It looks like he's getting better, so that's good news for him.
He was already solid in Loenhout as well. Actually, that went a bit under the radar, but I think he was that one who actually crashed in the first lap and then needed to come back from the 40th place, ending 12th. That was already decent, but definitely continuing his good form. And I think his private sponsor of the Hollebeek Hoeve will be happy with that, because I've been in contact with them, and they really live for these top 10 places here today, just like the sponsors of Hans Maas do, and they should be happy to get Tom Meeuwse in the top 10. Outside of the top 10, we see Lander Looks. We haven't talked about him in a while, and that was usually because we had a lot of failed podcasts. However, I do want to mention him now. Jens 13th here. Lokes in recent weeks has been criticizing the Belgian national coach that he isn't being selected for World Cups. He thinks it's weird that Vermeers got selected and that Merlier gets selected over him. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that Lokes deserves or deserved spots in the World Cup and that he was skipped, was skipped for selection, which was unfair? Or does he just not have the results to be allowed to make these claims that he should be selected for the World Cups?
I think he's just pretty inconsistent, really. He's got a couple really good results, also a couple wins in foreign countries outside of Belgium, especially in days where there's a World Cup somewhere else and he's selected. But sometimes he just doesn't perform very well. He didn't even win. Not a great field, same day as a World Cup. And really, you just need to win those races to get into that World Cup selection. You need to prove that you belong there. And yeah, sometimes he does it, sometimes he doesn't. And then, he gets selected a few times, performs quite well one time, less great the other time. It'll probably stay like this unless he improves his results, I would say.
Yeah, you were talking about that UCI race in Austria where he got beaten by Marek Konva and another Belgian, and yeah, I don't think it's strange that you're not going to be selected then at the cost of Vermeers or Merlier.
Yeah, and I think for the national team selection, like if you're the coach and you see it's basically a 50-50 on results, maybe with Johnny Vermeers, you just look back at past seasons and you see that Vermeers was a solid top 10 rider throughout most of it. And you just hope that he gets back to that level and that extra costs will help him. So you take a bit of a risk on him, whereas Lander Looks is kind of the rider he is at the moment.
Yeah, I also don't really see Lokes as a rider that really contends for World Cups. And I mean, if you look at Lokes' stance, he says, I've been screwed over because these rule changes that don't allow the top 50 to go and then it to be added with the rest. It should be about the 50 best riders racing there. And if you look at the point of view from Lokes, I mean, for him it does feel like he's screwed over. But then on the other hand, if you want to boost internationalization, it just riders like Lokes, if they wouldn't be from Belgium, they would struggle to get like a big contract at a team that he is now and in the position he is now. So overall, I think indeed, as said, Lokes is a bit too inconsistent and doesn't have the track record in previous seasons to rely on either. So yeah, in my opinion, it's between him or Dieter Zweek for most races, and Dieter Zweek is having a pretty solid season. So yeah, it's a bit of a coin flip between those two if we look back. But if we look at the results now, simply Tim Merlier is just a lot better, and even Gianni Vermeers was putting in some decent results lately. So yeah, Lokes really needs to pick up his results if he wants to get that World Cup selection next season. Final mention we have to make in the side of the men's race is Corné van Kessel. He was running good and then he crashed and he needed to change his helmet. Twan, tell us exactly what was happening with Corné van Kessel.
He lost the bike in a descent, went over the bars, and seemed to have hit the pole with his neck, then slid a little bit further. It looked really painful. Luckily, he was able to go on for a little bit. He got a helmet change as well, but in the end, it would be a DNF. Of course, the best of wishes to him. Hopefully, it isn't something that is going to keep him out long term.
Yeah, definitely didn't look good, and that brings us to the subject of these wooden poles that you have in Baal. Jens, I know you aren't the biggest fan of those. Tell us why.
They've got a couple sharp edges. They're just weird. Generally, you know what to predict. It's always the same kind of barriers or the same kind of poles and tape or netting or whatever. And this is something else. There's a lot of things you can hit, really. It's a weird structure. So there's not a lot of room to crash. If you make a mistake, you're almost definitely going to hit one of them. And they're also the wrong height, which we saw in the women's race with Blanca Vas, who just hit one of the barriers with her hand. And generally the course tape or whatever wire they use is just slightly lower than the bars, which means your hands are fairly safe. It's just unfortunate choice, really, of someone who designed the cycling center. I don't think it was so nice himself, but I don't actually know. It's a permanent course, which is also another problem, but that's another story. Yeah, it's just unfortunate choice of design, I think, for those barriers.
I mean, maybe they are suited to like very small children cycling there, because that's what usually are the camps that are hosted there. And I don't think that So Nice was the one who actually designed that. I think you're right there, but maybe for these small children it works, because they like maybe even fit under that if they're on their bike, because it's usually from the age of 4 or 5 that you have children cycling there. So that could perhaps be the reason that they chose for that. But then again, for these races, I think you're right that it doesn't really work, because we've seen it claim a couple of victims every year. I think one time even, was it Twan and Aerts who crashed there and broke his collarbone?
I think Klaus van Tornout. I don't know if he broke it, but
Anyway, we've seen a couple of crashes there, and it probably cost someone a bone or two, maybe even. So that's not good to see there. So I think that's definitely something that can be improved there. Do you have any other things that you think can be improved around this parcours? Because you have been analyzing all the parcourses on your Twitter this season.
yeah, I think the problem we're seeing now is that similar to Namur, really, the course has been used so much that a lot of roots are coming up, a lot of rocks are coming up in the surface, because just the dirt gets carried by the tires, and if you have people riding there all year round, it just degrades the surface, really, and a lot of climbs are less the sort of iconic climbs. There was one climb where you could just ride up or just not ride up, and now it's just very easy because there's a line that's used all year round, so it's very hard. The surface is very hard. The climb isn't that hard anymore. It's just not great to have a permanent course set up that's always the same. I think they should change it up every maybe 2 or 3 years or even more. And the structure, the barriers aren't great either. So I think there's an argument to be made to change something, but that's probably a lot of money. I don't know if they want to invest it, but yeah, I would argue for changing some things up every once in a while, just to keep it safe, keep it varied. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it with farming, it's maybe a bit of a weird comparison, but farmers, they put different things in their field every year so they don't drain the ground too much. And in a way, you could indeed say that that's also what should happen with the cyclocross parcourses. If you do the same thing every year, the ground never gets to rest. So then indeed you get these parcourses becoming easier and easier, which is also the reason why Namur moved the off-camber higher, which also wasn't a huge success in my opinion. So yeah, that's indeed something that should be looked at in my opinion as well.
Yeah, easier, but also less safe, I would say, with roots and rocks coming up in the surface. It invites flat tires, just deeper ruts and stuff if they stay. It just makes it less safe and also less exciting, I would say. So yeah, I don't know exactly what the solution is, but something should be done, in my opinion.
Let's talk about the women's race then. All the big names were there, except maybe Van Anrooy and Pietersen. For the rest, the riders who really challenged for the win were there. Brand was there, Betsema was there, Van Empel was there, and Tom will tell us how these riders all did.
It was a strong start by Magali Rochette. Unfortunately, she wouldn't hold on to it, as Alvarado, Betsema and Brand would continue to press on over start-finish. Brand and Alvarado would sprint for the bonification second, Alvarado coming out victorious, leaving Betsema a little bit off the back, and that is basically where she would spend the whole cross, in a very safe third place, but still threatening a little bit to catch up with the first two if they made any major mistakes. But they wouldn't make too many of them. Brand not having the greatest technical day, but they would go back and forth, Alvarado and Brand. And in the final lap, Brand would place an acceleration in the running part, and Alvarado simply couldn't keep up. Unfortunately for her as well, there were some lapped riders in the way, which certainly didn't help her case. But Brand would take home the victory ahead of Alvarado, and Betsema indeed finishing up in third.
Before we talk about the racing, I would like to mention that Lucinda Brandt was really emotional in her post-race interview, because she was talking about her friend Amy Pieters. If you don't know what happened with her, she crashed in a training camp of the Dutch national track team in Spain and has been held in a coma in a hospital in Spain, and things aren't going really well with her. It was also for that reason that I thought it was very nice to see that she and Lars van der Haar were riding with special pink flares in their helmet to show their support with the family of Pieters. So that was really nice to see, and of course Brandt was racing with that in the back of her head today, and that's what she said, that is a thing that keeps her awake at night sometimes, which makes sense. And I mean, I don't necessarily want to say it's the case, but Brandt was making a lot of mistakes today. Do you possibly think that could have a correlation with the fact that she maybe wasn't 100% focused on racing, because she also has other things on her mind?
I think we saw a lot of people making mistakes, so I don't necessarily think that is correlated. Of course, it could play a role, but you saw Betsema making mistakes as well. We saw Van Empel almost crashing at least once. I think Alvarado just did a very clean race, and the contrast was very big. But it could play a role. Definitely, if you're distracted, if you're maybe sleeping less, then it does play a role. Obviously, if you do that too much, then it starts to affect your performances.
Indeed, we saw quite a lot of mistakes due to the slippery parcours. Brandt made a couple of them, Alvarado not. Could we then say that we today really saw a battle between the power of Brandt and the technique and consistentness of Alvarado?
Yeah, I do think that was the case. Alvarado, I think, only making one mistake in the tricky small descent that they have there. But for the rest of the race, it looked really clean and really not in trouble on the technical parts at all. It was the power parts indeed where Lucinda Brandt could make some differences.
Alvarado today putting in a very good ride, fighting with Brandt for the win. And yes, I think that it was a case of, as you said, that Brandt was having the power advantage and Alvarado was keeping it consistent throughout the corners, capitalizing on mistakes by Brandt. But is it just me, or does this Alvarado story remind me a bit of the story that we had with Vorst earlier this season? With Vorst, we also had a lot of stories from what's going on. On the Koppenberg, it was training, then it was peaking for the Europeans, which didn't work out, and then after the Europeans, she was there because it was apparently back issues that held her back. With Alvarado, we kind of had the same in a way, in my opinion. We heard what's going on with Alvarado, it's not what it is anymore, and it was struggling, and she had the DNF in Zolder. Also in Loenhout, there was still being tough questions being asked by the Belgian TV. And then today she's there again, and it was eventually also back issues with her. So is it really a case of the back issues that are causing the riders to struggle, and that for Alvarado now her back is working, or is that just not the case?
I think we don't know. That's the simplest answer. Maybe there's something they're holding back. Maybe it is actually the back issues. Maybe there's something else going on. But if there is anything, they're probably not telling us. And there's probably a reason for that. But it's true that she had a couple of bad races, then now a very good race again. Maybe she's just inconsistent. Maybe she's been working through something. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Of course, she didn't have the ideal preparation in the summer as well. They've also not really told us what happened too much over there. Of course, there was the little bit about the overtraining. But I think Alvarado just not had an ideal preparation, and then if there is some back issues, I mean, it just quickly piles up on what already isn't ideal form. And I think today it just all came together well again, and you can see what a class rider she is.
It was certainly exciting, and they were close together in the final part of the race. However, there were also a bunch of back markers in that final part of the race. Personally, I did see Alvarado be held up by one of the American back markers, but then I also think that it wouldn't have made a difference because Alvarado came onto the wheel of Brand going into the final corner, but then ultimately was burned out and had to settle for second. But it was still something that we're not used to seeing here, so many back markers, and it's the second race in a row that we see that.
It just in an ideal world, you never want to be having a conversation like this, because it's just really unfortunate for the race. Yeah, maybe she is able to get to the wheel slightly earlier. It's just a bit easier to get to sprinting, but you just don't want to see back markers influence the race at all. And it's very unfortunate in such a big lap that they have an 80% rule, because the people at the front, their lap times, they aren't going to drop off as quickly because they are just better. They can hold more consistent times, whereas at the back, they start losing more and more time as the race goes on. With, of course, like a little bit of a peak in the first lap because you lose more time naturally there. Like on a course as big as this, ideally you'd, I think, have 2 points where people are taken out, or lower the percentage that is needed to be taken out, because a situation like today is just not very fun.
Yeah, I definitely think something needs to happen about that rule. Isam, who couldn't make it today to the podcast, also said that he thought 2 points would be the solution, or indeed lowering the rule. It's a bit of a different approach to it, and I think what's the best depends on the parcours. Today is a very long lap time, but if it's dry, you have shorter lap times, so you don't have that issue really. A second point also means you need extra people to stand there, because there's always a UCI commissaris there and 2 other people standing there. So that also requires extra staff, and that's not necessarily easy. But I think you should maybe more look at the percentage lost in terms of lap times, because if we look at it, in the first lap, if you lose 70% of the time there, in my opinion, you should already be taken out because you're going to get lapped the next lap. Of course, there can be exceptions where you have a crash or a mechanical, but then again, those are the exceptions. So I think maybe a way of looking at that would be better, but it's something tough. It maybe needs to be reworked a bit, especially when you have big fields like this and long lap times like this. But then again, also Loenhout was not that long of a lap time, so it's definitely something that needs to be looked into. But we shouldn't let that fully distract us from the fact that Lucinda Brand claimed another victory here today. Jens, what did you think overall of the ride of Lucinda today?
Yeah, as we said already, it's a bit inconsistent. She made quite a few mistakes, allowed Alvarado to come back a few times, even though she had a gap. But she still managed to win because she's just so strong. I think that's the story. So Alvarado was good, but Brand was just a lot stronger, and she managed to ride away in the final lap.
Brand also comes until 46 seconds of Betsema in the overall classification. Betsema herself was not happy about her performance today, and especially the time she lost compared to Brand today. But what do we think about the ride of Betsema?
I think it's just solid. It's ideally she would want to be more in front, of course, but limiting the damage and the overall, doing quite a good job of it. To be honest, and nothing really much more there was to get today.
No, I didn't. I don't think she had the legs to participate in the fight with the first 2 riders, and I think she limited the losses. And it's always in the Christmas period. If you do all the races, you always have 1 or 2 bad races. It's not really something too weird. I think she'll probably be there again tomorrow. So, and then the next race in Neanderthals for this classification, she'll probably be better again. I would assume. We don't know, of course, but that's what I think.
But is it really a case of just in the Christmas period doing too much races? Or do we need to conclude that Betsema throughout the entire season has been doing too many races? Because she started her season in Lokeren, which was the first race of the season, and since then she's never taken a single weekend of rest. She's been going to all the races, most of the time doing double weekends as well, and I mean, okay, she skipped a couple of smaller races on times that there was a race far away, like in the Val di Sol weekend. But overall, do we maybe need to conclude that for Betsema, the best is to perhaps skip the World Cup in Flamanville and focus on preparing for the World Championships, or is there a different way that she can really get into peak form that we saw in the beginning of the season for her when we go towards those World Championships?
I think ideally you would take like an extra week of training maybe without racing, and I think the World Cup is the only classification where she isn't close enough that she can still win it. So that would be the weekend indeed. Also, of course, only being one race, and she definitely doesn't need the form, and probably racing it isn't quite gonna do it.
I don't know if she's actually worse than in the beginning of the season. I think it's also just technical courses, and she tends to make quite a few mistakes in really technical courses. So that might just be the time loss, but she's definitely been doing a lot of races, and maybe she should consider taking a week off. But it's hard to say because she's only really done 2 full seasons at the highest level, I think. Is that correct? And that means we don't really know how she prepares best for a single peaking moment. So it could be that she really thrives with a lot of races, and this is the way to do it for her. We don't know.
Yeah, this is her 3rd season fully competing at the highest level, of course, having that suspension in the 2019-2020 season. And the season before in Bogense, the Dutch team kind of made her the designated leader after she had that breakthrough season, winning also quite a lot of races before and just after the World Championships. So that was then also after which she got suspended, but I think it's indeed a bit hard to tell how she prepares best for the World Championships. I do think that last year was perhaps her best shot of winning the World Championships. The parcours did seem to suit her, but then again, at the same time, it was a weird sandy parcours. So I think that for Betsema, maybe she should wait a bit. Like, I don't know what her plans are for the rest. I do know that she will be riding Hulst, skipping Gullegem, and then racing Herentals and the Dutch Nationals. And then after that, she can always decide what to do. She can maybe go to Flamanville, and then if Flamanville... No, she can't skip Hamme because she's still leading the X2O Trofee. So going to the States earlier is not something we will see Betsema do, in my opinion, because the X2O Trofee is the only thing she's actually leading at the moment. But perhaps after the Dutch Championship, she can decide that she will focus on skipping Flamanville and focus on training, because after all, after tomorrow in Hulst, we already will know if Betsema still realistically has a shot of winning the World Cup, or if that is really fully going towards Brand. But with Betsema, I feel like as long as there's an opportunity on paper, she will go for it. I expect Brand to skip Flamanville, and then again, I do see Betsema capable of going to Flamanville, then taking back perhaps 40 points on Brand, before then in Hogerheide still giving it a final shot. So we'll need to wait and see on that one. Let's run down our entire top 10 then. Brand taking the win ahead of Alvarado, Betsema, Worst and Van Empel. Second half of the top 10 is without Dutch riders. We see Sanne Kant in 6th place, continuing her form of decent results ahead of Catablanca Vash, Magali Rochette, who returned from illness. Top 10 is rounded out by Clara Honsinger and Katie Klaus, both from the Cannondale Cyclocross World Team. Out of these top 10, who to you is the biggest surprise, Twan?
I think Vash, Rochette and Honsinger just all... This is a bit disappointing for me. Hoped for all of them basically for a little bit more today, and the rest of the people, I mean, I think Kant rode an okay race, beating all 3 of those people, but it also isn't too crazy. Katie Klaus riding a very solid race, as well as Vas and Munro to get that 10th and 11th places. A lot of Dutch women missing, which opened up the top 10 a lot, and they benefited from it for sure.
Yeah, I agree. For Vash, I don't think that we have seen the same levels in terms of performances as we saw at the beginning of the season. Those World Cups in the States and also in Tabor, and obviously winning Overijse were real highlights for her. So yeah, I think that we haven't seen that form now. I do think that faster parcourses suit her a bit better than the muddier ones. But then again, also if we look back at her track record, she does have quite some decent results in terms of muddier races. So that's not the full story that you can go up. She doesn't like muddy parcourses. Jens, what do you think out of the riders? Who surprised you the most, either in a good way or in a bad way?
Well, I'll just say on Vash, I think she knows how to peak, and she also knows how to take it easy sometimes and not perform as well as you might expect from her. So I wouldn't look for a real explanation. I think she'll be fine at Worlds. Probably this is just preparation. She has a lot of stuff to do this year as well. So with mountain bike, road racing, and she's also coming off an Olympic season, which generally takes quite a lot out of you. So I would say the biggest prize is not quite in the top 10 as Madigan Monroe. We see the Americans, Honsinger, Klaus are just ahead of her, which only half a minute for Honsinger, and that's a pretty big performance, I think, for Monroe, even though she's not actually in the top 10. Very good result, surprising as well.
Yeah, definitely think so as well. Her results have been going upwards throughout the last couple of weeks. I mean, it started pretty bad with 44th and Rukve, but ever since, I mean, with the exception of Zolder, she's been improving herself significantly. Then again, of course, there's a couple of names not here today, but that should be irrelevant because if you look, she's close to Klaus and Honsinger, which is definitely solid. Also, not the gap to Rochette was a bit bigger, but still ahead of Kay, ahead of Harnden. Also, Sydney McGill putting in solid results the last couple of weeks. But what I was wanting to say is that we see that the results of the Americans go up the longer they stay here, the more racing experience they gain. In the 23 category, we saw Scott Funston score top 10. In the men's junior race, we saw Jack Spranger, the Pan American champion, get a podium in Loenhout and another top 10 today. Also, the Canadian Luc Valenti starting to improve his results, same for Andrew August. The juniors women category also saw an American on the podium, Catherine Sarkisov ended second there, so definitely good to see this talent from the other side of the ocean do this well after staying here for a while, and that's definitely encouraging to see. And I think that has to do with them being here for a longer period of time now, which gives them the experience in the racing. Do you also think that, Jens?
Yeah, well, if you look at, for example, Sarkisov, she's only been here for 4 races now since Dendermonde, so it's not even that long, but she's improving every race, I think. And that's sort of the story. You need some of the experience of doing those big races. In America, the experience you get is mostly, well, the derogatory way to say it would be a grass grit, but of course it's not that simple. But going from the hardest American race probably to something like Namur or Baal here, that's just a step you need to make, and it's great to see that she's already made it. That's quickly, 4 races and already on the podium. And it's the same story with Munro, with all the other Americans coming over. You need some experience, and they're adapting quite quickly, actually, I would say.
Certainly good to see, and let's hope that some of them are able to continue this good form tomorrow in Hulst. Looking forward to another day of racing in the World Cup. Jens and Tom, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for having me.
And as said, tomorrow more racing in Hulst. We are going to the 13th round of the World Cup there, so we will be making another podcast of that. See you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.